Welcome to the haunted hour, where the night holds secrets. Ramadan is a time of prayer and peace, but some things don't rest, even in the holiest nights. They hide in the shadows, watching, waiting. As the night deepens and silence settles, you are not alone. Tonight, as you fast and pray, be careful, because not everything that walks in the dark is human. The horror begins now. Story 1, Ramadan, the Unknown Ghost. In the old town of Kamrabad, Ramadan was a time of peace and spirituality. Yet, one fateful night during the sacred month, an unforgettable horror unfolded, leaving an indelible mark on the hearts of its people. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town prepared for iftar. The streets were filled with the aroma of sweet dates and steaming lentil soup. The mosque's towering minaret stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, a beacon of faith and community. However, an unsettling chill swept through the air, a stark contrast to the warm evening. It was as though an unseen presence had descended upon Kamrabad. Families gathered in their homes and courtyards, but Sammy, Layla, Hassan, and Amina chose to sit together in the mosque's courtyard. They laughed softly as they shared stories about the mosque's rumored hauntings. Despite their skepticism, a strange tension lingered in the air. When the Maghrib prayer call echoed across the town, a low, mournful sound emerged from the mosque's ancient walls. Layla froze as she spotted a fleeting shadow dart across the floor. "Did you see that?" she whispered. The others dismissed it as a trick of light, but unease began to creep into their hearts. As night deepened, curiosity got the better of them. Sammy lit a small lantern and led his friends into the mosque's inner halls. The corridors were dimly lit by moonlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting eerie patterns on the walls. The once beautiful Arabic calligraphy now seemed like cryptic warnings written in an ancient hand. The group tread carefully, their footsteps echoing ominously. Suddenly, a loud creak reverberated through the hall as if someone or something was walking behind them. They turned sharply but found nothing but shadows. Amina clutched Layla's arm tightly. "Maybe we should go back," she suggested nervously. But Sammy pressed on, determined to uncover the source of these strange occurrences. If you have come so far into this story, I'd like you to give a thumbs up. Let's keep a target of 100 likes and subscribe to our channel for more such content. Let's continue. In a secluded corner of the mosque, they came upon an old wooden door slightly ajar. As they approached, it slammed shut with a deafening bang, sending dust flying into the air. A cold wind swept past them, carrying with it a faint whisper that none could decipher. Then came the figure, a pale woman in tattered robes, standing silently behind a stone pillar. Her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, and her expression was a haunting mix of sorrow and rage. "Go back," she said in a voice that seemed to echo from another world. "This night is not yours." The friends froze in terror as an overwhelming sense of dread filled the room. Amina let out a scream that broke their paralysis, and they bolted down the corridor. As they ran through the twisting halls, it felt as though the walls themselves were closing in on them. The air grew colder with every step, and an oppressive silence enveloped them, broken only by their frantic breaths and hurried footsteps. Layla suddenly stumbled and gasped as she felt an icy hand graze her shoulder. She turned around but saw nothing. "It touched me," she cried out, her voice trembling with fear. Meanwhile, shadows seemed to come alive around them, shifting and swirling like smoke. The sound of dripping water grew louder and more persistent, as if marking each passing second with dread. Finally, they burst into the mosque's main hall, a vast space bathed in pale moonlight streaming through colorful glass windows. For a moment, they thought they were safe. But then she appeared again, the ghostly woman, standing at the center of the hall. Her form was clearer now. Her face was gaunt but strikingly human, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. She raised an emaciated hand toward them and let out a piercing wail that shook them to their cores. Hassan screamed as he was suddenly flung backward by an unseen force, crashing against the cold stone wall. The ghost advanced toward them with unnatural speed, her movements jerky yet deliberate. Sammy's mind raced as he remembered his grandmother's tale about calming spirits with prayer and blessed water. He fumbled in his pocket for a small vial of water his grandmother had given him during Ramadan, a gift meant to bring peace during troubled times. "Hold hands," he shouted to his friends as he uncorked the vial and sprinkled some water onto the ground between them and the ghostly figure. With trembling hands, he unfolded a piece of paper containing a short prayer written in Arabic. Ya Allah Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, he began reciting aloud and urged his friends to join him. Their voices started weak, but grew stronger as they repeated the prayer together. The ghost paused mid-step. Her glowing eyes flickered like dying embers. The ghost let out one final wail, a sound so heart-wrenching it brought tears to their eyes. It began to dissolve into wisps of light and shadow. For a moment, her face softened into an expression of peace before she vanished completely. A warm glow filled the hall as if dawn had arrived early, banishing every trace of darkness from its corners. The oppressive atmosphere lifted instantly. Even the air felt lighter. The friends stood in stunned silence for several moments before collapsing onto their knees in relief. As they stepped out into camera-bad streets just before far prayer began, they were greeted by familiar sights. Lanterns glowing softly in windows and townsfolk preparing for another day of fasting and devotion. Though exhausted and shaken to their cores, Sammy, Layla, Hassan, and Amina felt a strange sense of gratitude, not just for surviving, but for witnessing something beyond comprehension during this holy month. In time, their story became part of Camera-Bad's folklore, a chilling reminder that even in times of faith and unity like Ramadan, mysteries from beyond could still reach out to touch our world. In the days following a terrifying night at the mosque, life returned to its usual rhythm for most villagers. Children played in cobblestone streets, while adults prepared for iftar each evening with laughter echoing through open windows. Yet for Sammy and his friends, things were different. They carried an invisible weight on their shoulders, a shared trauma that bound them together even more closely than before. Every time they passed by the mosque or heard its call to prayer echoing across town at dusk or dawn, memories flooded back. The chill in their bones from that night lingered like an unwelcome guest refusing to leave. One evening after while sitting together under stars twinkling like distant lanterns overhead, Layla spoke up hesitantly. Do you think she was trying to tell us something?" Sammy frowned thoughtfully. He hadn't considered that possibility before now, but couldn't shake off her words either. What if there was more than just fear behind those haunted eyes? What if her story intertwined with theirs somehow? "I think we owe it to her," Hassan said quietly after some time had passed since Layla's question hung heavily between them like fog rolling over hills at dawn. "We need to find out who she was." Amina nodded vigorously. "Yes, if we can discover why she's still here, maybe we can help her find peace." Still here? Enjoying our content? Please give a thumbs up to show your support. Remember the target of 100 likes and subscribe to our channel for more such content. Let's continue. Thus began their quest, a journey into Camera-Bad's past that would lead them down winding paths filled with unexpected revelations about love lost long ago amidst tragedy intertwined with faith itself during Ramadan centuries past, when this very mosque first rose up from humble beginnings built by hands eager for connection, both earthly and divine alike. They visited local elders who shared tales passed down through generations, stories steeped not only in history, but also rich folklore woven intricately into fabric life itself within the small town nestled between mountains where secrets lay hidden beneath layers time forgot. One elder named Fatima spoke softly about a woman named Zainab, once beloved by all who knew her, a healer known for her gentle touch and kind spirit who had mysteriously vanished one fateful night many years prior, leaving behind unanswered questions and broken hearts scattered throughout community, like petals blown away by wind. Zainab was said to have fallen victim to jealousy. Fatima explained while sipping mint tea brewed fresh from garden outside, where fragrant herbs danced lightly against warm breeze, drifting through open window nearby, inviting whispers secrets long buried beneath surface, once more rise up in the light again after so many years spent hiding away dark corners memory lost forever until now. She loved someone deeply, Fatima continued slowly tracing lines etched upon palm-weathered hands worn smooth over decades spent nurturing life around her, instead focusing solely on herself alone. But others could not bear witness such happiness without seeking vengeance upon those deemed unworthy. Story 2. Ghost killings during the month of Ramadan. The town of Nurabad was known for its peace and devotion, especially during Ramadan, a holy month in Islam where people fast, pray, and seek blessings. The streets were filled with the sound of the call to prayer, and every home glowed with lanterns as families gathered for iftar. But this year, something dark loomed over Nurabad. A fear crept into the hearts of the people, a fear of something unseen, something evil that lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. It all started on the first night of Ramadan. A man named Farhan was walking home after Tarawih, special night prayers, when he felt someone following him. The street was empty, and the cool night breeze sent shivers down his spine. He quickened his pace, but the footsteps behind him grew louder. He turned around, but no one was there. Just as he sighed in relief, a cold whisper brushed against his ear. "You should not have stayed out this late." Farhan's heart pounded. He ran toward his house, but before he could reach the door, something pulled him back with an invisible force. A blood-curdling scream filled the night. The next morning, his body was found near the mosque, his face frozen in terror, his eyes wide open, and his hands clawed at his throat as if he tried to fight off something horrible. The news spread like wildfire. The people of Nurabad were shaken. The elders whispered among themselves, claiming that an ancient curse had returned. Stories of a vengeful spirit, once buried in the town's past, were now being spoken of again. The second killing happened just 2 nights later. A young woman named Zoya was walking home from the market after buying food for Sahur, the pre-dawn meal before fasting. She had always loved the peaceful silence of night, but this time something felt different. The streetlights flickered, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. As she passed by an abandoned house, she heard a faint, eerie humming. It sounded like an old lullaby, but there was no one around. Fear gripped her heart, and she began to walk faster. But suddenly, the temperature dropped, and she felt a hand grab her wrist, cold, lifeless, and strong. She let out a scream, but before anyone could hear her, she was dragged into the darkness. Her body was found the next morning near the same spot as Farhan's. But this time, there was something more terrifying. Her skin was covered in strange symbols, written in what looked like dried blood. The town was now in complete panic. Some people believed that a jinn, a supernatural being, had been disturbed during the renovations of the old graveyard. Others said it was the ghost of an old cleric who had been wrongfully executed centuries ago. Whatever it was angry, and it was killing during the holiest month of the year. A group of young men, Sami, Bilal, and Hamza, decided they needed to do something. They could not let more people die. That night, they armed themselves with blessed water and verses from the Quran. They knew the ghost only attacked after midnight, so they waited near the place where the last 2 victims had been found. As the clock struck 12, the air became heavy, as if the night itself was watching them. The sound of whispering filled the air, growing louder and louder. The streetlights dimmed, and a cold wind blew through the alley. Then they saw it, a shadowy figure, tall and thin, standing at the end of the street. It had no face, only deep, empty darkness where its eyes should be. It raised a bony hand and pointed at them. The moment it did, Hamza suddenly gasped, clutching his throat as if something was choking him. He dropped to his knees, struggling for air. Sami and Bilal shouted the verses they had memorized, their voices shaking. They threw the blessed water toward the figure, but instead of disappearing, it let out a deafening, ear-piercing scream that shook the very ground beneath them. The walls of the nearby houses cracked, and the sky itself seemed to turn darker. The ghost moved toward them with unnatural speed. Bilal was lifted into the air by an unseen force, his body twisting in pain. Sami, shaking with fear, grabbed his phone and played the call to prayer. The sound filled the air, and for a moment, the ghost stopped. It let out a horrifying screech before vanishing into thin air, dropping Bilal to the ground. The three friends ran back to the mosque, their bodies trembling. The imam, the leader of prayers, listened to their story with grave eyes. "This is no ordinary spirit," he said. "It is something ancient, something that should never have been woken up." The next day, the elders of the town gathered. They decided to hold a night-long recitation of prayers in the mosque, asking for protection. As the entire town gathered inside, the streets outside were left empty. But in the dead of night, something terrible happened. A loud, blood-curdling scream echoed through the town. It was followed by the sound of windows shattering and doors slamming shut on their own. The air turned freezing cold, and for a moment, even the mosque's lights flickered. The people inside held their breath, praying harder. Then, suddenly, an ear-piercing shriek filled the air, followed by silence. When they stepped outside at dawn, they found something chilling. The ground near the abandoned house was burnt as if something had been set on fire. The shadow of a tall, thin figure was imprinted on the wall, as if the ghost had been trapped there forever. From that day on, the killing stopped. The people of Nurabad never spoke of that ghost again, fearing that even mentioning it would bring it back. The old house was sealed, and no one dared to go near it. But on some nights, during the last days of Ramadan, a few people claimed to hear a whisper in the wind, a cold voice that said, "Ramadan may be holy, but darkness never sleeps." And when the lanterns flicker for no reason, the people of Nurabad know it is watching. The people of Nurabad believed the nightmare had ended, but unease lingered in the air. Despite the elders' decision to seal the abandoned house, whispers of the ghost's wrath persisted. Some claimed to hear faint footsteps in the dead of night, while others swore they saw flickering lanterns near the sealed house. The town was gripped by paranoia, and families began locking their doors before sunset. 1 week after the final scream, a stranger arrived in Nurabad. He was an older man with a long beard and piercing eyes, dressed in simple yet worn clothes. He introduced himself as Qadir, a traveling scholar of Islamic mysticism and folklore. Hearing of Nurabad's plight, he had come to investigate. The imam welcomed him cautiously, but many townspeople were skeptical of his intentions. Qadir spent his first day examining the burnt ground near the abandoned house and consulting with elders about Nurabad's history. He discovered that centuries ago, a cleric named Maulana Ishak had been executed for practicing forbidden rituals. His death had been swift and brutal, and his body was buried in what later became the old graveyard. Renovations to this graveyard had coincided with the first killing. Sometimes, Qadir explained to the imam, the restless spirits of those wrongfully condemned can be awakened by disturbances to their resting place. Qadir proposed a cleansing ritual to banish any lingering evil from Nurabad. The ritual would require participation of the entire town and must be conducted during Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power, one of Ramadan's holiest nights when prayers are believed to be most effective. As Laylat al-Qadr approached, preparations began. The townspeople were instructed to fast not only during daylight hours, but also from speaking ill or harboring negative thoughts, a form of spiritual purification. Meanwhile, Qadir worked with Sami, Bilal, and Hamza to create protective talismans using verses from the Quran. On Laylat al-Qadr, every family gathered at the mosque for an all-night prayer vigil. Qadir led a procession to the abandoned house just before midnight, armed with blessed water, incense, and recitations from the Quran. They encircled the house. The final confrontation. As they began their prayers, a chilling wind swept through Nurabad. The shadowy figure reappeared on the wall of the abandoned house, its form twisting and writhing as if trying to break free. The air grew heavy with an oppressive force that made it difficult to breathe. Suddenly, a deafening roar erupted from within the house. Windows shattered outward as an unseen force pushed against Qadir's protective circle. Sami and Bilal held their ground, reciting verses with trembling voices, while Hamza poured blessed water onto the burnt ground. The figure screamed, a sound so horrifying that some townspeople fainted on the spot. But Kadir stood firm, raising his hands toward the heavens and calling upon Allah's mercy to cleanse Nurabad of its torment. With one final screech, the shadow disintegrated into a cloud of ash that was carried away by the wind. The oppressive weight lifted instantly, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. As dawn broke over Nurabad, it was clear that something had changed. The air felt lighter, and for the first time in weeks, birds sang in the trees. Kadir assured everyone that Nurabad was now free from its curse, but warned them never to disturb sacred grounds again. The abandoned house was torn down and replaced with a small garden where people could pray and reflect. Though life returned to normal over time, Nurabad's residents remained vigilant during Ramadan, ensuring their actions aligned with faith and respect for their ancestors. And yet, on rare occasions when lanterns flickered unexpectedly or shadows seemed longer than usual, some whisper that darkness might still be watching, waiting for another chance to rise. Story 3. The Ramadan Day Terror. The town of Al-Noor was a quiet and peaceful place, especially during Ramadan, a holy month in Islam where people fast, pray, and seek blessings. During the day, the streets would be empty as people rested, preparing for iftar, the meal to break the fast. But at night, the town would come alive with families gathering, lanterns glowing and the sound of prayers filling the air. However, this Ramadan was different. A strange fear had settled over the town, like a shadow lurking in the daylight. It started with whispers, stories of people seeing something unnatural, something terrifying in broad daylight. At first, no one believed it. After all, evil spirits were said to be locked away during Ramadan. But soon, the terror became real. It was the 5th day of Ramadan when the first strange event happened. A young boy named Rafiq was playing in the courtyard of his house while his mother prepared food for iftar. The sun was high in the sky, and everything seemed normal until Rafiq heard a soft whisper calling his name. Rafiq! He turned, but no one was there. The wind had stopped, and the air felt heavy. Thinking it was just his imagination, he continued playing. But then, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A shadow, darker than anything he had ever seen, moved across the ground. But there was no person to cast it. It slithered like a snake, creeping closer. Rafiq's heartbeat raced. He stepped back, but suddenly, a cold, invisible hand grabbed his ankle. Rafiq screamed. His mother rushed outside and found him on the ground, shaking in fear. She looked around, but there was nothing. Just the bright sun shining in the sky. But Rafiq refused to go outside again. He kept whispering, "The shadow had tried to take me." 2 days later, another incident happened. A group of women were walking back from the market, their baskets filled with fruits and dates for iftar. The streets were empty, as most people were resting before the evening. But as they passed by the old abandoned house near the mosque, they saw something chilling. A woman in a black abaya, a long robe worn by women, stood in the doorway of the abandoned house. Her head was covered, and her face was hidden by a veil. But something about her was wrong. Her body was completely still, too still. The women slowed their steps, feeling uneasy. One of them, an elderly lady named Fatima, called out, "Sister, do you need help?" The woman did not answer. Then she moved, not like a normal person, but as if she had glided forward without taking a step. The women gasped. The figure lifted her head slightly, and for a brief moment, her veil lifted with the wind. What they saw made their blood freeze. Her face was hollow, no eyes, no mouth, just a dark void. And then, she let out a chilling, ear-piercing scream that echoed through the empty street. The women dropped their baskets and ran, their hearts pounding when they told the men of their families what they had seen. Some dismissed it as exhaustion from fasting, but others knew the evil had returned. That night, as the town gathered for tearaway special night prayers, something happened that no one could ignore. A man named Kareem, known for his kindness, suddenly let out a deep, unnatural growl in the middle of prayer. People turned to look at him. His body was shaking, his head twitching violently. His eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Then, without warning, he let out a loud scream and collapsed. Men rushed to his side, but when they touched him, he sat up with terrifying speed. His lips curled into an unnatural smile, and in a voice that was not his own, he spoke. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Then he started laughing, low at first, then louder and louder until it became an inhuman shriek. The Imam began reciting verses from the Quran, and Kareem's body convulsed violently. He screamed in agony, his hands clawing at the ground as if something inside him was trying to escape. Finally, he collapsed, unconscious. When he woke up, he had no memory of what had happened, but the people of Al-Nur knew the truth. Something evil was walking among them. The fear in Al-Nur grew with each passing day. People avoided going out alone, even in broad daylight. The mosque was filled with prayers, but the darkness seemed to grow stronger. On the 15th night of Ramadan, the terror reached its peak. A chilling wind howled through the streets. Even though it was a warm night, the lanterns flickered and an unnatural silence fell over the town. Then the screams began. From different parts of the town, people started screaming in terror. Doors slammed shut on their own. Windows shattered without reason. Shadows moved unnaturally on the walls, creeping toward the terrified families inside their homes. In the mosque, the Imam and the elders gathered, reciting prayers continuously. Suddenly, the main door burst open and a figure stepped inside. It was tall, covered in a black cloak, with no visible face. The temperature in the mosque dropped and the candles blew out, plunging everything into darkness. The men clutched their prayer beads, their voices trembling as they recited holy verses. The figure let out a deep, guttural growl, shaking the very walls of the mosque. But as the prayers grew louder, it began to scream, a sound so horrible that some men collapsed, covering their ears. Then, with one final, ear-piercing shriek, the figure vanished into thin air. The town remained silent for the rest of the night. But by dawn, something chilling was discovered. On the walls of the mosque, written in dark, dry blood, were the words, "Ramadan cannot protect you forever." The next day, the town elders gathered and decided to perform a grand prayer ceremony, seeking protection from the evil that had invaded their home. Every single person in the town attended, praying together with all their hearts. After that night, the strange occurrences stopped. The streets of Al-Nur slowly returned to normal, but the fear never completely left. Even today, those who live in the town refuse to speak of what happened that Ramadan. And when the wind howls through the streets during the holy month, some still whisper that the evil is watching, waiting for its time to return. And in the darkness, when the lanterns flicker for no reason, a cold whisper can sometimes be heard. "You cannot escape me." As the fear in Al-Nur persisted, whispers began circulating about the old graveyard on the edge of town. It was a place rarely visited. Even during the holy month, the elders warned that its soil was cursed, holding secrets best left undisturbed. But on the 18th day of Ramadan, two curious teenagers, Amir and Bilal, decided to investigate. Under the blazing sun, they walked through the overgrown path leading to the graveyard. The air grew colder with every step, and eerie silence replaced the usual sounds of birds and wind. When they reached the gates, they froze. The grave seemed untouched by time, yet the shadows cast by the tombstones moved unnaturally. As Bilal stepped closer to one of the graves, he heard faint whispers, soft at first, then louder. "Leave." Amir laughed nervously, dismissing it as their imagination. But then, the ground beneath Bilal began to tremble. A skeletal hand burst through the soil and grabbed his ankle. He screamed as he fell backward, pulling Amir down with him. The boys scrambled to their feet and ran as fast as they could back to town. When they told their families what had happened, their fathers decided to check the graveyard themselves. But when they arrived, everything was normal except for a single grave that had been freshly dug up. No one dared ask who or what had done it. The vanishing children. The terror escalated on the 20th day of Ramadan when 3 children vanished while playing near the mosque after their afternoon prayers. Their parents searched frantically but found no trace of them. The only clue was a chilling message scrawled on the mosque's wall. "They belong to me now." That night, as families gathered for iftar, strange noises echoed to the streets. Whispers, laughter, and faint cries for help. Some claimed they saw fleeting figures darting between houses. Others reported hearing their children's voices calling out from empty rooms. The town elders organized a search party at dawn. They combed through every corner of Al-Noor, but found nothing until they reached a small cave near the outskirts. Inside were 3 dolls dressed in clothing identical to what the missing children had worn. When one man reached out to touch a doll, it turned its head toward him and whispered in a child's voice, "Why did you leave us?" The final confrontation. By the 27th night of Ramadan, the sacred Laylat al-Qadr, the town was gripped by despair. The mosque was packed with people praying fervently for protection. The imam led them in reciting verses from the Quran throughout the night. But just before dawn, a deafening roar shook Al-Noor. The lanterns flickered violently before extinguishing completely. A dark figure appeared in the center of the mosque, a towering shadow with glowing red eyes. The imam stood firm and began reciting Ayat al-Kursi, the throne verse. The figure screamed in agony but did not retreat. Instead, it spoke in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your prayers cannot save you now." Suddenly, a young girl stepped forward, a child who had been mute since birth. She raised her hands and began reciting verses from Surah al-Baqarah in a voice so pure it silenced everyone present. The shadow writhed and shrieked as her words grew louder and more powerful. With one final scream, it exploded into nothingness, leaving behind only silence. A new dawn. When morning came, Al-Noor felt different, lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. The missing children were found near their homes, unharmed but unable to remember where they had been. The elders declared that Allah's mercy had saved them and vowed never to let fear weaken their faith again. Though life returned to normal, some still whispered about that Ramadan, a month when darkness tried to overshadow light but failed against unwavering belief. And yet, deep in forgotten corners of Al-Noor, where shadows linger longer than they should, some say you can still hear faint whispers. "I will return." That was a haunted hour, but the darkness never truly fades. If you felt the chill, if the shadows seemed a little closer, you're not alone. Like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying stories. And remember, some nights, something watches back. Until next time, sleep well.